Greetings, fellow artists. I'm Charles Bernard, and welcome to this video. I'm a professional paperback book cover illustrator who also founded the Online Art Academy, where you can learn the fundamentals. This video is all about abstraction, but not painting abstract pictures. I'm talking about the underlying foundation of a painting that has a representational subject, a more realistic looking subject. Underlying that realistic looking subject, there is an abstraction. And great artists like Bernie Fuchs or Bob Peak, who were illustrators, they were able to create interesting abstractions on which their more representational images rested. The abstraction is the underlying foundation that this video is going to introduce you to. Underlying every successful painting is an abstraction. When the abstraction is great, the painting is great. And there are certain principles that need to be followed for an abstraction to become really great. I can't go into all of those principles in one video here. But what I do focus on here is the abstraction itself. And I'm going to start by just mentioning that abstractions can quickly be done with little thumbnail sketches like this. So that's an abstraction right there. Underlying a painting that has a more realistic appearance, where the subject matter is representational, there is this kind of abstraction that you see in this little thumbnail sketch. You have to learn what the principles are that make a great abstraction. And I'm going to be showing you a technique that I use to arrive at interesting abstractions that are the basis or foundation for more realistic looking images. So here's another quick example. You can work out an abstract foundation for your painting very quickly by doing small thumbnails like this. But then there is this other technique that I'm going to be showing you, in which you begin with a larger image, and using various brushes you can then create these abstractions rather quickly. And once you have an interesting looking abstraction, one that has at its basis some of these principles that a great abstraction has, such as dominance, for example, and flow or movement, gradation, and so forth, then that abstraction can act as the foundation for a more realistic representation, and you really don't have to add all that much sometimes to these abstractions for that abstraction to become a recognizable subject, as you'll see in this video. Underlying every more representational or realistic image is this kind of abstraction that I'm talking about here. And I'm going to bring in a rough color sketch that I did for one of my publishers for a novel. And here's what it looks like. This is one of several rough color concept sketches that I did for a novel for this particular publisher. And this one wasn't selected. It was a different concept sketch that I did that was selected, for which I did the finished art for the cover. Now, in this rough color concept sketch here, there is this kind of abstract underlying structure that you see here. It becomes apparent and visible only when the details and the modeling that is found within this more realistic looking image is stripped away, when everything is simplified. And to see this abstract tonal structure, I'm going to turn it into a black and white or grayscale like you see here. The abstraction or value pattern or tonal structure is the foundation on which the more realistic looking images sit. So to see this abstraction more clearly, the details and the modeling of the forms has to be eliminated. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to simplify everything by eliminating the details and over here and all the modeling. So I'm just adding the darks now, and then there's another dark, but not as dark as the darkest darks on his scarf here. That dark is a little bit lighter. And then I'll simplify the shadow on his face here like this, getting rid of the eye, which is a detail, getting rid of all the details, the little snowflakes, getting rid of that. And you see how the image is becoming more and more abstract now because of the elimination of the small shapes and modeling and details. And when you're doing these kind of abstractions, they need to be designed, which means that you need to apply the principles of design. And therefore you need to know what those principles of design are and how to apply them. You just can't go in there and start adding dark values and light values any old place you want. If you do that, then you're not applying the principles of design. You're not letting them guide you, inform you as to what needs to be done. In other words, you're just working blindly if you don't know those principles and you aren't applying them to the abstraction or tonal structure. I can't go into teaching you those principles of design and how to apply them to these abstractions here in this one video, because there's just too much to learn. You're not going to learn everything you need to know from one video. Now, the abstraction consists of flat shapes, like you see here, and they make up the abstraction. There's no modeling. There's not a lot of little shapes or forms. It's mainly the big masses, the big shapes that make up the tonal structure or value pattern. The key to making a really interesting painting or drawing is this underlying abstract structure of values that make that value pattern or tonal structure. If you're able to come up with a really good and interesting abstraction, and you do all of the other things correctly that need to be done in order to produce a great painting, you're going to end up with a really interesting and great painting. But the key is to get a really good value pattern or abstraction on which you base your painting so that you end up with a more realistic looking image like this that has at its basis this abstract value pattern. And now I'm going to move on and show you some quick abstractions that are a bit different from just adding flat abstract shapes of value like you see here. There's going to be some variation within these abstractions, some tonal variations, so that they look a bit more like they could be turned into more realistic images by not adding too much more to them. It's important that you begin to think in abstract terms. And the only way you're really going to begin to understand the importance of abstraction and how to create successful abstractions is by actually doing abstractions, and a lot of them. So therefore, it's important that you actually do some, and I'm going to start off by making a custom brush, which I would also like you to make, so that you can then start doing some of these abstractions that I'm going to be showing you how to do. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is bring in the layers palette and add a new layer, an empty layer. Then go to my tools bar, select rectangular marquee tool. Then I'm going to draw a shape, a long, thin shape like that. It looks more like a line, a thick line, not too thick. Next, fill it in black. Then it needs to be angled a bit toward the left, just a little bit, something like that. Keep the line selected, go to Edit, down to Define Brush Preset. Now this brush is number 98, and I can give it a name. I'm going to call it Horizontal Brush. Click OK. Next, select the brush tool in the toolbar. Then I'm going to bring in the brush palette and click on Brush Presets, or I could click on Brush Tip Shape, and then I'm going to look for number 98, which is right there. I can click on it a couple of times, and this comes up. You can see the brush right here and the name of the brush. Click OK. Now, right here, it's important that you have transfer selected, like that, and smoothing. Have those two selected. Then click on transfer a couple of times, and this comes up. Make sure pen pressure is on. So you're going to need to use a stylus pen. It's not going to work with a mouse. So it's important that you have a pen. And here's my brush. Now watch what happens when I start to draw with it. You see the jagged edge? That you need to eliminate. And you do that by going to Smoothing. Make sure Smoothing is selected, and go down to where it says Spacing, and then move the little handle all the way over toward the left so that you see only 1% right there in the little box. Now watch when I start to draw. I get a smooth edge. So that's very important. So here you see my setup. I have the Layers palette open, as well as what is called Magic Picker. And this enables me to have the color picker open all the time without continuously going to the color picker in the toolbar and bringing that up and then selecting my color and clicking on OK. Now if you don't have the Magic Picker and you want something like that, all you have to do is go to Google and type in Magic Picker, and it'll tell you where you can get it. It is the abstraction that establishes mood, not the details, not the little shapes, not the modeling, the nuances of tone and color. It is the big masses of tone making an abstract structure that expresses a mood. That's how you get mood. You don't get mood through starting a picture by drawing carefully the subject matter, adding one shape after another like this, the way beginners draw. You don't get mood that way. You get mood by establishing the big masses of value and color. Something like this, and this is just very quick, as you can see. Being able to create these kind of abstractions with big masses of tone and color is one of the most valuable things that you're ever going to learn how to do. Because if you can't get this right, no matter how much detail you add to the drawing or painting, it's never going to be a powerful representation of the subject that expresses a powerful mood. This is the secret to establishing powerful moods in your pictures. This kind of abstraction that results from the big masses of tone, the big shapes of values. Once you understand this and are able to apply what you're learning in this video, you'll be able to create powerful moods. When you look at the great paintings by the concept artists, you can see that their paintings are very abstract, and they don't do much to turn that abstraction into a more representational image. They add a few details here and there, and all of a sudden the abstraction becomes a representational image of something. So all of a sudden you can see that that abstraction becomes a spaceship or some kind of monster or a figure and so on. Now what I'd like you to do is, with your layers palette open, add a new layer, an empty layer like that, select black, then draw a border, a picture border, like this, and do it quickly. Don't fiddle around. Don't be slow. Be bold. Be courageous. Even if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. The important thing is not to hesitate. And that line that you make when you draw it very carefully shows your hesitation, shows that you're an amateur, shows that you are fearful. Therefore, it's important that you draw boldly. What I'd like you to do now is go to the toolbar and select the rectangular marquee tool that you see right there. Then, following the shape that you drew, add that shape with the marching ants to the shape that you drew, and then eliminate the marching ants by holding down the Command key on the Mac and then hitting the letter H key. So it becomes invisible, and now select a value that is going to fill up the entire shape. So let's say, for example, I want a lighter value. So I go to my magic picker, or you may have to go to the color picker and select it there if you don't have the magic picker. And now, using your brush, add that value to the shape like this. And you can press down on your stylus pen to varying degrees of pressure to get a little bit of tonal variation in there so it doesn't look too flat. Next, you select black and then add another layer. So on this empty layer, I'm going to add my abstraction. And what you do is, without doing a lot of thinking, just letting your instinct guide you, quickly brush in some kind of shape like this, varying the pressure on your stylus pen to get different values like you see here. Make sure that your brush is large in size, not small like that, but make it large, something like that, where you get nice big strokes like that. If you have a small brush, you're not going to be able to establish those big masses of tone. You see, that's not good. So when you have a big brush, you can get those big masses of tone. When you're making the strokes with your brush, make them boldly. Don't hesitate. Do them quickly like this. Don't do a lot of thinking as to what the next stroke should be. Just start adding quick, bold strokes like that. When you look at my layers palette, you can see that I have two layers here. This one in which the background was established, the value of that background, and then the other layer on top of that on which I added these strokes. And the reason for that is because if I want to keep the same value of the background, but I want to change the shapes here, these abstract shapes, all I need to do is deselect that layer add another layer onto which I can then add some other shapes, some other strokes like that. So I have a different abstraction. And if I don't like that, I can eliminate that, deselect that layer, or just trash it, or you might want to hold on to it, then add another layer. And again, with that same value background, I can now go in there and varying the pressure on my brush will give me lighter or darker values. And the darker values in the foreground like that, and the lighter one further back helps to create a sense of depth. Now, if I don't like the value of the background and I want a different value, all I need to do is go to that layer on which that background value sits, and I just selected that layer. Then I can add a different value, let's say a darker one like this. Now the mood changes. See, it becomes a more mysterious, dark mood. There's a mood here, and I haven't added any details, because it's not the details that make the mood. It is these big masses of tone. That's what you need to master. That's how you establish mood. And if you look at those concept art paintings, as I mentioned earlier, you can see that the mood is established through the big, simple masses of tone, as well as color. So that's how you get mood, not by painting a lot of details or small individual parts that make up the subject. If you're able to get down the big masses of tone like that, then you're going to be able to create powerful moods. The mood is primarily established by that value that predominates the abstraction, which means that there is one value that takes up a greater amount of area or space than another. So after you've quickly done your abstraction the way I've explained it to you, then you carefully look at the abstraction to see if there is this one largest shape or area of a particular value that helps to establish the mood. And right now, the dark shape here is a little too similar in size to the background shape. So therefore, that background shape needs to be changed in size. That is, it needs to be made larger so that I don't end up with two large masses of tone that have a similar size or equal size. So by cutting into the dark shape like that, I'm increasing the size of that lighter background value shape. So that shape now predominates. It's larger in size than the dark shape. So this is very important because it is that shape of value that predominates, that is larger in size than any of the other value shapes, that helps to establish the mood, and is primarily the size of that tonal mass and what its value is that will have the greatest influence on what the mood is going to be. So if I changed that value of the background to a lighter value like I had before, then the mood would be completely different. Or if I darkened that value like this, now the mood is again different. It's now more gloomy than it was before, more mysterious, more oppressive. I'm going to return it to its previous value, like that. There are a few things that you need to remember when you're doing these abstractions. And the most important thing to remember is to keep it simple. In other words, don't start adding a lot of little shapes like that. Keep everything bold and simple and consisting of larger masses of tone like you see here and the background. Not a lot of little shapes like that, which would then create a rather busy appearance, and that's what you want to avoid. that kind of busyness of little shapes scattered all over the place is very distracting, and it will distract from, let's say, a big tonal mass like this. And work in primarily 1, 2, 3 values, or you could add a fourth, and the great Andrew Loomis, the great illustrator, hopefully you've heard of him, and if you haven't, then check him out by going to Google and typing in Andrew Loomis. He used 4 values. So what that would look like is if I added a value like this over here, smaller in size, this off-white, it's not completely white, and it shouldn't be, otherwise it looks too stark. And when you place a small light shape like that into the abstraction, place it where the darkest value is. You can see that I placed it right here because that's where the darkest value is. Place it right next to that dark value, thereby creating a strong focal point right there, drawing the eye to that white shape, or off-white shape, rather than to this part here, where the value contrast isn't that strong. So the idea is to create this difference in sizes of tonal masses, with one that predominates, the largest, and then this here is the next smallest, and then the smallest right there. This helps to create a focal point and interest through a variety of sizes. Place your lightest light next to or against your darkest dark. Keep things simple, and then also at the edges here. Don't create shapes that have a lot of irregularities like that, a lot of little bumps here and there. The reason for that is because that sort of thing attracts a lot of attention. And you want the eye drawn to the focal point, which is this here, in this example, and that kind of edge is distracting. So, as you can see, I'm smoothing it out somewhat. You can still have an edge like this, but not one in which there are a lot of little bumps along the edge that are too distracting. When you're adding these kind of different values, creating these abstractions, you're also establishing different value keys, as they are called. Now, I can't get into that too much here because you can't learn everything from one video. But what I will say is, with the addition of this off-white shape here, and the darker values in the rest of this abstraction, I've established a major value key. That is, there's a major interval of space between these darker values and the lighter value on the value scale. So you have to become familiar with the value scale. And I can't show you that because, like I said, there's just too much to learn, and I can't get all of that into one video. But with what I am showing you, even with this limited knowledge that you're gaining here, and if you're able to apply it, you will see dramatic results. And you'll be able to establish powerful moods in the abstraction. Now, if I did something like this, where I lowered the value of that off-white shape, now I no longer have a major value contrast. This is called a minor value contrast because the interval of space between the darker values and this lighter value on the value scale are much less. That is, there's a more narrow range of values within this abstraction than there was in the previous one, in which this value was an off-white. In the off-white value, the range of values is greater. And in this minor value contrast, the range of values is shorter on the value scale. So if you're not familiar with the value scale, then you have to learn about that. But again, I can't show you everything in one video. When you're doing your abstractions, always establish a focal point. which is the most important part of the picture where the greatest amount or strongest value contrast is located. And in this case, it's right there. So once you have an abstraction that expresses the mood you're after, look to see what you can see within that abstraction. What do these masses of tone, of shapes, suggest to you? And then you can build the details on this abstraction. The abstraction is the foundation for details and for any modeling or rendering that is done. So what does this suggest? You have to use your imagination. Add another layer in the layers palette on which you can then add the details. So maybe this is some kind of building. You see, now I'm adding lines, and then I'm beginning to add smaller shapes, but I'm building on the abstraction. Whatever it suggests to me, that's what I'm going to try to work on. So I'm not sure yet, but it could be any number of things. It's all about what you imagine it to be, what it looks like to you. So maybe this is something else. Now, I'm not going to start working this out as to what it is going to be. See, I can make all sorts of changes. I'm not stuck with what I've established. I can cut into that shape. I can make all sorts of modifications, whatever I need to do to make it work. And then this here could be smaller buildings, maybe. This is a larger building. It's a curved building. And maybe there's a line going across like that. And then I could add smaller shapes right there. See, it's beginning to take shape. It's beginning slowly to become something recognizable. But you see how I'm adding to it and how I'm making changes. But I began with that abstraction, which suggested something to me. And maybe get rid of this. So you just keep working on your abstraction, changing it wherever you think it needs to change to become what you envision it to be. So maybe there's something like this here. See how it's changing? And you just keep working at it. But you began with the abstraction, and the abstraction suggested something to you, and it acts as the foundation for all the details, for all the smaller shapes that you're going to be adding. So maybe I could darken this. See how the abstraction changes? But you started with something. You started with an abstract foundation on which you then build. Okay, now I can add smaller shapes, more detail, and I have to be careful that there aren't any distractions. This is the center of interest, and if I add a lot of little shapes like this, like I said earlier, if it looks busy like that, that will distract attention away from the center of interest here. Also, things need to read clearly. You have to be able to tell what it is. Don't make things look confusing. If it looks confusing, you got to go in there and make changes until clarity is established. Avoid anything that looks cluttered. The important thing is to make a simple statement that reads clearly. So maybe that part there has to be darkened. I'm not sure yet. But it takes time. Once you have something that you're interested in that looks promising, some kind of abstract design, then you can start building on that, as I said. Usually it's not a good idea to have an isolated shape like that. It's isolated because it's not connected to another light shape. And if you have an isolated shape like that, the eye of the viewer is going to be stuck there, riveted to that shape, because it can't move into another shape because there isn't another light shape that it is connected to. So if I did something like this, for example, where I added that light shape, which could be a road, connecting with that light shape, and then another light shape, let's say down here, now that light shape is no longer an isolated shape, and the eye of the viewer can move from one shape into another like that, and along that road, and then over toward the big city in the background, which is beginning to look more like a spaceship. I'm going to darken this value a little bit so that that light shape of the city stands out a bit more, and also I'll darken this road here in the foreground a little bit. So the light value of the city is a little bit more conspicuous now. So even though these values are a little bit darker, they're not so dark that they prevent a flow from one shape into another shape. There's a lot more going on here than I can tell you, because again, the amount of things that you need to learn to do successful abstractions cannot be conveyed to you in one video. It's not as easy as you may think, but the thing is, what I have told you so far, if you're able to apply it, you're going to be able to create interesting looking abstractions that have a mood to them. And you shouldn't begin by drawing details, by drawing a representational image. Practice doing these abstractions first and get really good at them, and then you can start adding subject matter and details like I've been showing you here. Okay, let me get rid of this and start doing some more abstractions. So now I have this light value that covers the entire picture area, and on that I could add a darker value, but before I do that, I'm going to add another layer onto which I then do the abstraction. Remember, one layer for the background value, the other layer is where you do the abstraction. And then remember to add different amounts of pressure to your pen so that you get different values. The darker values in the foreground, the lighter ones further back, to create a feeling of depth. And then this time I'm going to start at the top like that. The major area, the largest value mass is this, of course. Remember that there is a predominance of one value that takes up the largest amount of area. So this is an abstraction that could be turned into something. There are three basic values here. This dark, 1, then this lighter dark, 2, and then of course the lightest value of the background, 3. And I could add a fourth, like I did earlier. So that fourth would be an off-white, and I'm adding it where the darkest value is to create the strongest value contrast, to draw the attention of the viewer right there. So this is where the center of interest would be. I'm not adding a bunch of little shapes all over the place like that that would distract attention away from this center of interest here. Now let me get rid of those little distractions. The idea is to create a simple statement of bold value shapes. Don't hesitate, as I mentioned earlier. Go in there and start adding these shapes quickly and boldly like this. Don't hesitate. If you hesitate, it's going to have an amateurish look to it, like you were afraid of what to do next. And this sort of boldness, this quick indication of these abstractions, helps to establish a feeling of spontaneity, like it was done on the spot quickly, and that's how it should look. Then I could go in there again, like I did before, and I could add a smaller light shape, which becomes my center of interest. So work with 3 or 4 values. Here again you can see that I placed the lightest value against the darkest value, creating a strong contrast, and the value that has the largest area that predominates is the background value. So I've established one value that is larger in size than all the other masses of value. This is what you need to do to get interesting and effective abstractions. Adding these few principles can make a big difference between you establishing some kind of mess that is called an abstraction and an abstraction that has some design to it, that has a composition to it. Your abstraction needs to have clarity. That is, see how that light shape stands out against its background. It reads clearly. It has clarity. And so does this dark shape. It reads clearly against the lighter value background. And there's a completely different mood here than in earlier versions because of the lighter value in the background, which is the primary influence for establishing a particular mood, as I stated earlier. In any abstractions that you do, the following list of things should be present. The abstraction should make a simple statement, like you see in this example here. There should be clarity. The shapes should read clearly. You can clearly see that there's a light shape here against a darker value background, and the same for the darker value of this shape is clearly seen against the lighter value of the background. Also, there should be no distractions from center of interest. This is the center of interest, and if I added, let's say, things like this, these shapes coming out of that big shape like that, this would be a distraction. See how your attention is drawn to this, and the attention is drawn away from the center of interest here. So that's the sort of thing you need to avoid, as well as, like I pointed out to you earlier, a lot of little shapes here and there, forming a busyness that also is distracting. Also, edges. Edges, like I showed you earlier, that are rather irregular like this, with a lot of little bumps here and there. That can be distracting as well. See how this creates a distraction, how the eye is attracted to that jagged edge, drawing the attention away from the center of interest here. So this sort of thing needs to be avoided. And then avoid busy or cluttered look. Again, like I showed you earlier, if you add a lot of shapes like this, spotted all over like that, you create a spotted look, a busy and cluttered look. So that's something that you shouldn't indicate in these abstractions. Stay away from that sort of thing and just focus on a nice, bold, simple statement like you see here. So far I've been using this line brush, but you don't need to use just this line brush. I use it because I get interesting shapes here, a variety of different shapes, thick lines, thin lines. But as you can see here, I have the brush presets, and I can select a different brush to get a different look. Maybe that brush or this one, see what I get with that. This suggests maybe rocks or crystals. Different brushes can suggest different images to you. And don't forget to vary the pressure of your pen to get this variety of lighter and darker values. Let's see what else I can get here. Try this one. See the different effects you can get, and then you try to see if it suggests something to you so that you can develop this abstraction. And the finished painting has at its basis, at its foundation, the abstract structure that you started with, but it won't necessarily look the same way. But nevertheless, you're going to have an abstract structure as a foundation for your painting. And let's try something else here. See what I get with that brush. So each brush gives you a different look, different effect that can suggest different subjects to you. And usually it's best to have the design smaller in size than the background. Or you can have the design larger and the background smaller, like that. But don't make them equal in size, like this. This is equal to that. Usually I make my design smaller like that. This suggests mountains and maybe a river, maybe some buildings. Let me try this brush here, see what I get. That's an interesting look. So that would suggest something. That's also an abstraction. Different brushes are going to give you different effects. So try different brushes. Don't just use one kind of brush to get these abstractions. But the brush that I favor the most is this one here. So I get that variety of sizes. Then I can change the size of the brush as well. But don't add a lot of little bits and pieces like that. Keep it bold and simple. You can add a couple of pieces, a couple of floaters as they're called, that aren't attached to the main shape or design. Do something like this too. It's a different key. It's a light value, and then I could add some darker value like that, but not black or white. This is a high key. You have to learn about the different value keys that give you different moods, as well as different color keys, which also contribute to establishing different moods. Value keys, color keys, these are all the things that you need to learn about. I can't go into that here. There's just too much to learn, and you can't learn it from one video. Then I'm going to add a light blue color to those lighter shapes right there like that, and another one down here. This abstraction could be developed further. Once you begin to see a subject matter within the abstraction, or once that abstraction suggests something to you, and you like it, then you can go ahead and develop it further. So what I'm going to do now is get rid of this, and then what I'm going to do is start with the background. See, these abstractions that I just did, these few, they all started with this background here, but I don't have to use this background color. I can use a different one. So maybe this color. No, not that. Could start with something like this. Usually it's a good idea to begin with a neutral color for the background, but not always. You could start with a bright color, like this. But then, what you need to do is, when you add your abstraction, that abstract design needs to be done with low saturation color, like that. So if the background is a bright color, the abstraction needs to be made up of grade colors, low saturation colors, such as you see here, this low saturated color, which is actually a brown, a dark value, low saturation brown color. But usually it's a good idea to keep the background color more grayed, like that. And now I can add a darker value like that. And then an accent color like that. And that's it. Now if it suggests something to me, then I can go ahead and develop this abstraction into a recognizable subject. But if the abstraction looks good, then you go ahead and start to develop it. And you try to retain as much as you can of that abstraction, but it's going to change quite a bit. This is just to get you started. Okay, now let me do another quick color abstraction. So I'm going to select a background color. As always, I start with the background color, and this one is a really dark, deep, grayed red. If you look at the magic picker here, you can see that it is a red, and it's a very low saturated red. Now, once I have the background, I'm going to add another layer here, and onto that layer, I'm going to start doing the abstraction. And I have to pick another color, maybe a yellow-orange, a lighter yellow-orange, and let's see what I can come up with here. If you don't like the first attempt, just eliminate it. And then try something else. Varying the pressure on your pen gives you this variety of values. Lighter value, darker value, middle value. And just try different things until you find something that looks really interesting, that you can develop further. That doesn't mean that what you do here, that's what the final version is going to look like. That just means that you're starting with this initial design, and then you're developing it. You're going to make a lot of changes to it. And let me add a different color for contrast. Maybe a red violet or a violet. Let's go with a violet. And I'll add a darker violet. And then for some color variety, I can add a red violet. Can also change the color to one that is more red, like this, and then add it to the yellow, just a little bit like that. Just a hint of that other color to give it some color variety. So basically what I've used here is a complementary scheme. The yellow and the violet are complementary colors. If you use a complementary color to a color, you can't go wrong because you get that excitement, you get that vibration of color that makes color interesting and exciting. So a little bit of the complementary color added to a color will give you that interest, that color excitement, color interest. See, just a little bit of the violet and a lot of the yellow. And I think I'm going to work on this, develop it further. So I could start making changes, but you can see how I'm beginning to shape this into something that is going to look a bit more like some kind of large building, some kind of structure. And then down here, it has some roads like that leading into that large building. So you make changes until the abstraction begins to resemble something that you had in mind. You make whatever changes need to be made to this abstraction so that it begins to look more and more like what you have in mind. So I have this large building in mind, and you see how I'm changing whatever I think needs to be changed to make it conform more and more to looking like some kind of huge building, a futuristic building. And then down here, where this violet color is. I could maybe add a lighter color, a tint of that red-violet color, and maybe add some windows here. And then switch to the violet color, or blue-violet in the shadow. Something like this, maybe. But you see how it's beginning to shape up slowly. Add a darker color, and another darker color here, and so on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead and then show you the more finished version of what I finally came up with. And here it is. So you can see that I made quite a few changes and that it looks quite different from the original abstraction, but there's still some resemblance there. I didn't lose that abstraction entirely, but I did build upon it. And as you saw, I started making all sorts of changes and refinements until I finally ended up with what you see here. So this is a very good method, a very good process that you can use to do paintings with, by starting out with an interesting looking abstraction, such as I showed you, and then building upon that. And now I'm going to do another abstraction, and just as with the previous example, I'm going to carry this one a bit further to a more finished state as well. And I'm going to start by adding this grayed blue background, and against that dark grayed blue background, I'm going to lay in a lighter color and start coming up with some kind of abstract design. And now I can select a different color, a different value, and begin to boldly add various shapes that might suggest something to me. Then I can select yet another color, and I think it'll be a yellow-orange maybe, and add that over here. See a brighter color, like that. And I could carefully look at it to see if it suggests something to me, if it's an interesting abstraction. And then I go in there and I can start developing it. Add a pattern. This might suggest some kind of spaceship. Now it needs a lot of work, but I started out with an abstraction that I then can work on, and it becomes the basis for whatever image I finally end up with, whether it's a spaceship or maybe a city or a building, whatever it is. Now, if I didn't want to continue developing this into some kind of spaceship, I could maybe change it to something else. It could possibly become a city. So maybe there are these roads in the sky like that, leading from one building to another. And here are the supports for those roads. There's one there, another one here like this, another one over here. Now I'm doing this really quick, as you can see, but this would take a little time to work out. It doesn't happen in a few minutes. So maybe there's some kind of canopy here, some kind of covering for the roads. Then I could eliminate some shapes that I think aren't needed. And I could just continue to work on this. Maybe this is some kind of building in the foreground here. Just suggesting the building, or maybe more than one building. See how it's beginning to resemble something, some kind of city. And then maybe the road twists around like that, coming toward this building here. Now this is just a possibility. It's one possibility of many. You just have to use your imagination to turn the abstraction into something that resembles something. So here I have a couple of roads in the foreground. Maybe enlarge that shape somewhat. You see how that can be turned into something? Add a few shapes here that suggest buildings. Now I could add maybe a tint of a color of the yellow-orange, a tint of yellow-orange to draw the eye here even more. See how it's beginning to look something like a city with roads. And I could add a lighter green up here, maybe a little lighter than that. That part of the road is catching some light. That helps to draw the eye up here, and maybe a couple of light spots over here for balance, to balance this over here. And also I could repeat some of that color over here as well, like that. So it draws the eye over here. And then I could add an even lighter green color. So what I'm doing is I'm adding color variety now. A brighter yellow, where more light is being caught by the road. And a little more brighter color up there as well to help balance the image better, referred to as visual balance. And the shapes have to be interesting. So if they're not interesting, then you have to make them interesting. Now, this is where knowledge of what makes a shape interesting comes in. Avoid unbroken lines like that. You see how that line is just one smooth line across like that? Well, that makes for a very boring line. So it needs to be broken up, and I could do that by adding some kind of shape up here like that. And all of a sudden, that line now becomes much more interesting. It's not really a line, it's the edge of a shape, but it's thought of in terms of a line. So don't have long, unbroken lines like that, which make for a very monotonous edge. some dark shapes on the road here suggesting cars, something like that. And then color variety needs to be added to the colors that are there. So when you're starting out, you don't have that kind of color variety that is needed to make the color painting more interesting. So you have to go in there and add different colors like I'm doing now. And make sure the colors have the same value and intensity of the color that you're placing the colors on. Otherwise, if you have different values, you're going to end up with a patchwork of different values, and the shape is going to be broken up and look too busy. I think what I have to do is add more to the shape on the right side here so that it's anchored to the right border. I decided to do some more work on this rough color sketch and carry it a bit further, as you can see. So this serves as an example of what you can do, beginning with a rather abstract design and then developing that into some kind of recognizable subject. So you have to be able to see the subject within the abstraction. That abstraction needs to suggest a subject to you. Don't lose the abstraction entirely. Like in my rough color sketch here, it still looks somewhat abstract. It doesn't look completely realistic. There's a lot of suggestion going on here, and therefore it appears somewhat abstract looking, but not as abstract as the original sketch that I did, which was even more abstract. So when you start out with something that looks very abstract, you can turn that abstraction into something more recognizable, like in my case. And sometimes you don't have to do much to turn that abstraction into a recognizable subject. The abstraction that you arrive at when you're doing these different abstractions the way I showed you, you do them quickly, and once you find one that you like, that seems to express the mood you're after, and you see a subject in it, you can take all sorts of liberties with that abstraction. So, for example, I don't have to position the city right there. I could move it over toward the right, which is what I'm going to do now. You see, now the city has been moved over toward the right. And I have more space on the left now. So all of this needs to be balanced by what is on the left side, and I do that through what is called visual balance by this right here. And also on the left side, there's a lot more dark here and here, which adds weight to the left side. So all of this is a lot of visual weight that helps to balance all of this visual weight on the right side. So you also need to know how to balance a subject, and you need to know how visual weight is achieved. I can't go into all of these things here in one video. So if you want to learn a lot more, then check out my complete illustration art course. It's not until you really get this, you really understand the importance of abstract design, that your paintings are going to become really great. The greater the abstract design, and the more of it that is retained within the finished painting, the better the painting is going to be. This is what you need to understand. And that understanding isn't going to come quickly if you aren't familiar with this idea of the abstraction being the foundation for a more realistic representation of the subject. The great artists such as Bernie Fuchs or Bob Peak, who were among the greatest illustrators that ever lived, their paintings weren't very abstract in their early career. It's only as time passed and they did more and more paintings that you can see that their illustrations became more abstract. And I think that's because they realized the importance of abstraction over very realistic looking renderings of the subject. The abstraction is more important than getting a bunch of facts down on your canvas or paper. Cataloging facts is not important. It's not what is going to establish a powerful mood. It's the abstraction that establishes the mood, as I've been trying to explain to you in this video. And that's what you need to really understand. And not get caught up in painting a lot of individual parts and just thinking about the individual parts. You have to think about the whole as being an abstraction. And I think that's about all I'm going to do for this video. Now, you've learned some things about abstraction, but there is a lot more to learn. Watching one video isn't going to teach you everything about abstraction that you need to know. If you want to learn a lot more and learn the fundamentals, then check out my complete illustration art course. Thank you for watching, and please tell all your friends about my videos, anyone that you know who is interested in studying art. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, please do so that I can grow my channel and give you more of these kind of free videos. But unfortunately, you also need to realize that the free videos do not contain everything that you really need to know to produce really great professional looking drawings and paintings. You're only getting a small sampling of what an artist needs to know by watching these free videos. But even with these free videos, I've given you important knowledge that if you understand it and are able to apply it to your own drawings and paintings, you're going to see a big improvement in them. And now, goodbye.